To Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen, and dear viewers. Welcome to another lecture today, and we're delighted to have Amer Safir Saab with us. So, if we start off with A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajeem, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let me introduce Amer Saab to you. He's a Waqf Zindagi, a life devotee of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and he serves as the chief editor of the Review of Religions. And I'm sure all our viewers would know the Review of Religions was established in 1902 by the promised Messiah, والسلام, to spread Islam's true teachings to the people of the Western world. Amer Safir Saab has a master's in English literature from the Royal Holloway University. He serves on the team in English translation and interpreter for the Friday sermons of Hazrat Khilafat al-Masih. So we're delighted to have him today, and he's going to go through some cherished moments with Khilafat al-Masih. So if I pass it on to you, Amer Saab, and please enlighten us for the next 45 minutes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Jazakallah Nadeem Saab for this honor. It's very difficult to confine within such a short space of time the blessed characteristics of Hazrat Khilafat al-Masih. I will try in this time just to share a few moments which have been very inspiring for me, and perhaps it will be of use to other people as well. Alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity now for many years to serve with Hazur, and there's a few accounts which I think I would share. I'll start off by mentioning that in 2016, Hazuri Anwar sent me to America. In America, I had to travel to 22 states, and Hazur had written to me a letter and said, I want you to go to America, and apart from conveying the Review of Religions to every Jamaat, and apart from conveying the Review of Religions to external people, I want you to speak to all the youth in every Jamaat. So in 50 Jamaats in America, I had to speak to the youth in separate meetings and speak to them about experiences of Khilafat, and also hear any questions that they had and try and answer them. So I would sometimes then send messages to Hazur and ask for his guidance, because obviously the main purpose was to connect the youth with Khilafat. So out of all the questions, I think one very interesting question which I'd like to share was by a Khadim who, he's active in the Jamaat, but he didn't attend the session. And he had a question. He said, please, can you ask this question to Hazur and let me know the answer? So the question he asked me to ask Hazur on this trip was, how can I become Hazur's favorite? So the question was, how can I become Hazur's favorite? So I then, when I was on tour, asked Hazur this question, and Hazur gave me a beautiful reply, which was then sent to all the Khuddam in America to do it. So in reply to the question which I asked Hazur on behalf of this Khadim, that how can I become Hazur's favorite? Hazur replied, transform your state and condition according to the teachings of Islam. Serve the Jamaat with humbleness and humility. Most of all, strive to attain the pleasure of Allah the Almighty, and write to me regularly so I can remember you. So I thought this was a beautiful thing which Hazur had mentioned in light of how you become Hazur's favorite. And the person who asked this question, he told me later, many years later, that it reminded him of Hazrat Uwais Qarni. Hazrat Uwais Qarni, who was a companion of the Holy Prophet, and he never met the Holy Prophet, yet he was considered to be closer than many other companions to the Holy Prophet. I personally have seen this myself. I know people in other countries who Hazur has so much love for that I'm absolutely amazed that he even loves he loves everyone. But I've seen he has a special connection with people in other countries despite not meeting them regularly. And those are people who have implemented this advice that I have just mentioned. For Review of Religions in 2016, Hazur visited Canada, and at the time I had gone to Canada to not as initially as part of Hazur's tour, but to take the Al-Qalam project, which many people will be familiar with, which was started by someone called Rizwan Beg Sahab, and Hazur had officially inaugurated it. So I was only due to go for the Al-Qalam project and come back. So I went to Canada for the Jalsa, where Hazur was at the time. And we set up the Al-Qalam project, but because there was some time left, I asked Hazur permission if I could follow Hazur for coverage and record it on video, on camera, and make a series called Caliph in Canada, all access. So I did that for about a week or two while Hazur was in Toronto. What was interesting is that as I was following Hazur from the office to where he would have mulaqats, and from his house to the mosque, when he was leaving Toronto after 4 weeks, he left his office one day, and in the same routine he had been doing for 4 weeks, he would walk on the same corridor, and I was in the corner just capturing it by video. So all of a sudden, Hazur turned around and came back towards me and said, "When are you leaving?" And I said, "Hazur, I'm leaving just in a few days back to London." And Hazur said, "No, you will not leave. You will stay here." And that's all he said. And then he left. So, of course, I was hugely honored. But at the same time, I thought in my mind, what duty do I have? What do I have to stay for? Is it some specific assignment that I have? I didn't actually understand at the time. So I spoke to Private Secretary Saab and decided that as Hazur left the mosque in Peace Village in Canada, it's a long walk from the mosque to the house. And so I decided I'll take that opportunity to try and ask Hazur, but I would not approach him. I would just stand there. And if Hazur saw me, then I would ask Hazur. I had 3 questions in my mind. So Hazur finished the namaz. I quickly ran out from the side where Hazur would come out from the stairs. And as Hazur was coming down the stairs, I could see his eyes lock onto me, and I quickly looked down. I knew that look. I've seen that look many times over the years. When Hazur looks in this certain, most beautiful way, it also means that it's likely that he's about to say something to you. So I had 3 questions in my mind. As Hazur was coming down the stairs, he looked at me and said, "Let me guess, you want to ask this, this, and this," which was exactly the questions that I had in my mind. And then he joked that, "Let me guess, are you going to ask me, is 1 + 1 2?" So, of course, I laughed, and Hazur knew that I was going to ask him these questions. And Hazur then basically said, "I want you to stay for the rest of the trip and travel with me." And alhamdulillah, I then traveled with Hazur to Western Canada. So one thing I would like to mention about this trip, which was special, is it was one of the longest trips Hazur ever went on. And one thing I noticed is that although Hazur, of course, has events with outside people, he met parliamentarians, he met senior ministers, he had interviews with the people in the news, this was not the main thing which Hazur was spending his time with. By far, the thing which I noticed, which Hazur was spending most of his time with, was with ordinary people. Day and night, Hazur would dedicate hours to meeting people who had no rank, no status, who had come either on asylum, who had come from different countries, refugees, who had come from wherever. And the majority of Hazur's day, at least 3 or 4 hours on a daily basis, Hazur would spend meeting these people. And what I want to mention is that often you see accounts of the people who have met Hazur in mulaqats, etc., on different platforms. But what's amazing for me is the things which happen in between. As Hazur is walking from the house to the mosque, as Hazur is walking from the mosque to his office, people use every opportunity to try and meet Hazur. People particularly who might have some ailments or difficulties. And despite Hazur's extremely busy schedule, he never ever hesitates from giving them time, despite naturally Hazur being tired, naturally Hazur having met hundreds of people, delivering addresses or press conferences. So I would like to give a few examples in this regard. So I remember, especially in Peace Village, there was a person with his 2 sons who would stand there in the snow, and they would travel from 40 minutes every day. Peace Village, people might have seen the scenes that people were all over the place in crowds waiting for Hazur to pass by. These people somehow found a place where nobody else was standing, and they would stand there every day. I would be following Hazur every day, and every day, whenever Hazur was about to go in the mosque, these people from the corner would actually shout out, "Hazur, Assalamu alaikum, Hazur," and their son would also shout this out. So every day, day after day, they would say this. Hazur would pass by, whether it was snowing or whatever, they would come there, and in that same place, they would do it. And the son was only about 9 or 10, and the other son was about 6. So one day when Hazur came out the mosque, and I believe it was snowing at the time, it was nighttime, and these same people stood in the same place and said, "Assalamu alaikum, Hazur," in a very distinct voice. Then they ran after saying it just outside to near Hazur's house. They would do this every day. On this day, Hazur, I felt, must has had noticed them. On this day, Hazur walked all the way right up to them, to this father and two young sons. And Hazur joked to them and said, "Do you just say Assalamu alaikum Hazur every day, or do you actually go and do the namaz?" He said it in a very smiling way. And they said, "No, Hazur, we say the namaz and then we come and run out here." And then Hazur gave them some love, and they were, of course, then Hazur proceeded back to his house, and they were overjoyous. And even the young son afterwards said, "This is my favorite day, and this is the day for like Eid for me that Hazur specially came." On another occasion, um, this was towards the end of this very long six week tour, and what was noticeable is that Hazur Hazur was, of course, undergoing a very strenuous schedule, and he had been meeting thousands and thousands of people. He had delivered many addresses. The travel in Canada, many people had to travel 3 days by car. We were flying with Hazur and sometimes traveling 5 hours by road. By towards the end of the tour, people had become very emotional. It was impossible for every single person to meet Hazur, but Hazur squeezed in as many people as he could. So what was unique was the way that people found ways to try and get Hazur's attention, and the way Hazur reciprocated that love on many occasions. So, for example, in the very last Nagah that Hazur delivered in Calgary in the mosque, Hazur was one by one announcing the Nagahs, and one by one people would stand up. Then afterwards, as people know, the Hazur invited the groom and the father of the groom to come and meet him at the end. All of a sudden, as Hazur was about to finish, and this was, as I mentioned, towards the last days of this last day of the tour, a young boy who must have been 5, 6 years old, he suddenly gets up from the third or fourth line of the mosque in Calgary, and he starts walking towards Hazur. I happened to be right next to the security guard next to Hazur standing because I was taking some video, and I noticed this boy walking right towards Hazur. The security guard next to me, he grabbed this boy and he turned his trajectory and turned him back towards the where he was sitting. Hazur hadn't noticed him at the time. Then I noticed the private secretary sahib who's sitting in the first line. He saw this. We were all of us in Hazur who had traveled with Hazur were very emotional seeing the emotions of people. So private secretary sahib grabbed this boy and turned his trajectory around back to Hazur. And he said to the security guard, "He's not a threat, let him go." So as that boy then reached Hazur, who we have no idea whether his dad sent him or he just got up himself out of love, Hazur just finishing meeting the last person or the last groom and was about to leave, and suddenly Hazur looked and this boy is in front of him. And Hazur said, "Aapka bhi nikah tha?" Like, was it your nikah as well? And the boy laughed, and Hazur, showed him a lot of love, patted him on the head, and Hazur went on. And this is the way where another example where, despite Hazur being must have been so tired, such a busy schedule, the small moments in between, which are not the mulaqats or the formal programs you see, he always gives time to people. In those last days as well, there was a young girl who, again, must have been 8 or 9 years old. Hazur was in his office, and this young girl walked into the private secretary's office and just said, "I want to meet Hazur." I was there at the time as well, and we were all taken aback by her confidence. And of course, the people there just said very lovingly, "Look, Betty, you cannot meet Hazur at this time." But she was adamant. She said, "I will not leave until I meet Hazur." Um, and again, we were laughing, and we tried to explain to this girl that, look, you cannot meet Hazur at the time, but we said it in a very loving way. And some of the staff there said, "Look," but again, she was adamant. She said, "There is no way I'm going to leave here until I meet Hazur." She did not say it disrespectfully. She said it very lovingly, but with extreme confidence. So what they then said is that, "Look, we cannot let you meet Hazur, but what we can do is let you stand outside the door Hazur will leave from, and if Hazur so pleases, then when he exits, he will see you and he will say something." So what happened is this girl had such an impression on everyone. It was so unique the way she had come in that somehow the message got into Hazur that this young girl of 8 or 9 was standing outside Hazur's door and would not want to leave. The next thing we knew, Hazur had then instructed for this girl to come in. And again, I would like to remind that this was at the end of Hazur's tour, and it was such an extremely busy schedule. This was not the time for any mulaqat. Hazur was preparing to leave. But Hazur let this girl come in. Hazur spoke to her. Hazur showed her love, and she left with great affection. it was interesting that when we were traveling from, I believe, Toronto to Regina or Saskatoon, or it was either Saskatoon or Regina to another place. I had the honor of being at the airport when Hazur was there. Again, I saw how Hazur made time for his people at all times. There was a local missionary, and all he said to Hazur in the airport was, "Hazur, before you leave, can you give me some advice?" To my amazement, Hazur then took this missionary to the side. So you can imagine in the airport, you have the normal airport seats. Hazur proceeded to go and sit deep down the rows of the airport seats. Other passengers were still around somewhere. It was not completely packed, but there were still passengers around. There was nobody else around Hazur. Everyone kept a distance. And Hazur spent at least 10 or 15 minutes guiding this missionary and just sitting with him on these airport lounges. So what happened at the time is that the airplane had not come yet. So you can imagine looking outside the tunnel and no airplane being there outside these large windows. So Azur at the time joked that it may have been better for us to travel by car because in that way we could have seen the scenery and we would have saved time instead of, the aeroplane not being here and we are sitting here. So Hazur then proceeded to, first of all, he spent about 20, 30 minutes around the 15 people were there telling us his various experiences from Ghana. And those were very memorable moments when Hazur was in a very informal and jovial mood and giving us various anecdotes from his previous experiences. Hazur then sat down on one of the airport seats. I stood back on purpose, and what happened then is that Hazur started talking to people, and I then all of a sudden I was at the back, and Hazur suddenly called out my name. So I of course ran towards Hazur, and I was standing, and Hazur was sitting. This was my first time I traveled with Hazur, and so Hazur wanted to see what I had been doing. So he wanted to see, especially on my phone, I had some of the social media coverage. Now that was a very challenging time because I was in the airport and I did not have any internet signal, and I did not know if I could connect to the Wi-Fi, and I did not want to obviously say to Hazur that this is the case. So see Hazur sitting there, I'm standing. Somehow miraculously, within a very short time, I managed to connect to the airport Wi-Fi, and I then proceed to show on my phone, and Hazur looks through the Twitter feed and the Instagram feed of the Review of Religion's coverage at the time, and he proceeded to give guidance about different things and how to do them. Those were, of course, very memorable moments that there in the airport before we were about to go on the plane, how Hazur himself guided us and guided us in what to do. Again in Canada, I remember once Hazur was coming out his house in Calgary, and a father brought his son, who I believe suffered from MS, and he was not well. And again, all he wanted was that Hazur somehow was to pray for his child and to show love to him. Again, what normally they would say is that we can't say for sure if Hazur will meet you, but if you stand outside and if Hazur sees you, then that will be the prerogative of Hazur. But what I've always seen, in whether it's in Canada or Guatemala or the recent tour, that Hazur always, in these moments in between, because there are other moments which you normally are covered, but these moments in between, even then, there's not a moment where Hazur does not reach out to his people. So again, without anyone saying anything to Hazur, Hazur saw this person, he went up to him, he put his hand over this child, and of course, he prayed for this child, and the father was overjoyed. And again, this is how Hazur was reaching out to the people. On the very last day or second last day, Hazur was about to leave, there was another child who was about 15 years old, and he was having difficulty in his Hifz, his Hafiz Quran class, or his Madrasatul Hifz. So he had not passed it yet, and he had some difficulties. Hazur came to know, and Hazur said to him that I will do your madrasa test and you will come to me. And this was an extremely busy time. And so we were amazed that Hazur called this boy in of 15, 16, and for 20 minutes or half an hour, in this extremely busy time, Hazur went over with him the Madrasatul Hifz test. And Hazur said to him, I've passed you, although he did not give the certificate. Now, I don't know whether that child actually continued his studies or not because of difficulties, but the point is the way that Hazur was, despite being so busy, and despite not being the original actual time for the mulaqats, how he reached out to people and showed them love as well. I wanted to give an example of how Um, I've seen how Hazur has a special connection with Allah the Almighty, and I've seen this over the years and on so many occasions. Hazur's connection with God. In the recent tour in Holland, what happened is that due to the certain nature of the coverage, there were certain questions I wanted to ask Hazur for review of religions. But Hazur's schedule again was so busy that it was impossible or not appropriate for me to go into detail on the tour to ask Hazur. And so I was stuck that how do I go on with my coverage? Because if I did it without Hazur's guidance on these specific points I had, it would not be appropriate. At the same time, to waste Hazur's time on such a busy schedule, which I'm seeing, whereas schedule from day to night is completely packed, was not appropriate. So in the room, I was staying with some people who were in the Ghafla, who had been traveling with Hazur since the beginning of his Khilafat. And they said to me that, Amir, look, this is something Hazur told us, and we suggest you implement this, that instead of worrying about this, just pray especially, and leave it to God and see what happens. Because this is what we have done many times on tours. We've prayed to God and everything got sorted by itself. So I took this advice and I decided just to pray extra and say that, look, I have no way now of dealing with this. I leave it in the hands of God. And then I forgot about it. And I decided that even if the coverage was slightly delayed, I will not do anything until I solve this issue. The next day, there was a class, a student's class or a Vakfino class, I cannot remember which one it was, in Holland. And Hazur entered and he sat down and all the children were there. The MTA cameras had set up. I also entered with Amer Safir Holland and I sat down at the back with Amer Safir Holland. So I normally put my head down, but when I looked up, I saw that Hazur was focused onto me. Again, it's one of those things where I realized over the time that that beautiful but worrying gaze, when I realized that perhaps Hazur may be about to say something, suddenly Hazur called out my name and he just said my name, Amer Safir. And so I instinctively rushed from the back where I was sitting and I went around the side and went to Hazur. And as I was going to Hazur and reached him, I noticed that Hazur was taking time to take off his microphone. So he wanted to speak to me, obviously, privately, because the microphone was connected, everyone would be able to hear. To my amazement, Hazur then guided me exactly about the concern that I had about coverage and what I should do. And Hazur then proceeded to explain to me that this is what you are going to do. So then I had clear guidance from this, and the advice that I had been given by those other people was completely correct. And I was amazed that just by putting a trust in Allah, how Khalifatul Masih has this special connection that without me directly asking anything to Hazur, I just put my supplication in the court of God. But Hazur is so close to Allah the Almighty that the very next day, without exaggeration, Hazur himself was calling me and guiding about that matter, which had a big implication for the coverage for review of religions. So, Alhamdulillah, this is one way which I have noticed. One thing I would like to mention is with regards to the way Hazur guides us in review of religions. I just want to give one example, and there's countless examples which is impossible to go into detail about. Um, so what I'm amazed by is the way that Hazur guides us, and the way Hazur guides us is quite amazing. And I want to give one example about how Hazur once said to me that I'm going to give you a template for the design of how you should design the covers for review of religions. And I want to give some, background to why this is so important. So I wanted to share my screen. If I have this cover which I've shown, is this being able to be shared right now?
No, it isn't. If you could share it again, that would be lovely.
Okay.
Sorry, dear viewers, it seems we've just lost Amer Sahib. Bear with us and we will get him back on. I think we just literally dropped the connection all of a sudden. So, inshallah, I will give him a ring and see if we can get him back on.
In the meantime, viewers, if you wish to ask any questions to Amer Sahib, mashallah, he's been chief editor of the Review of Religions for several years, and as you've heard, he has the honor of attending various tours with Hazur Akbar Sayyid al-Ibn Nasr Aziz. So if you have any questions for Amer Sahib, please do post them in the chat. I think we have him back now.
Is my screen shared?
Yes, it is.
Okay, you can see the cover?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I just wanted to give one example of what's amazing is how much, of course, Hazur has religious knowledge, but what all of the promised Messiah and the Khilafat and the current Hazur, what I've noticed is incredible secular knowledge as well. And of course, this is without a doubt due to his connection with God, in my view. So I'll give you an example. This is a cover, this particular cover you would never have seen. It was never released like this. This is the cover that I took to Hazur. So Hazur said to me that every single cover that is going to be made of Review of Religions, you should bring to me and I will guide you on it. So everyone remembers the Charlie Hebdo shootings. It was a very, of course, big event, and Review of Religions had an important role to respond to it. When I took this to Hazur, Hazur gave me nothing short of a masterclass of how to design covers. So first of all, he said to me that, look, people only have a few seconds that you have to get their attention in. Your title is too long. It's going to distract people. So Hazur then proceeded, I saw him brainstorming, and he proceeded to say that, look, everyone knows that the Charlie Hebdo shootings relates to the topic of Islam. So we don't need to say the word Islam on the front cover. Neither do we need to say free speech, because also this is getting a bit long-winded. So why don't we take away Islam and free speech, and then we were left with our reaction to Charlie Hebdo shootings. Hazur thought about it some more and said, do we need to say our? Why don't we just go straight to the point and say reaction to Charlie Hebdo shootings? I said, of course, Hazur, this is excellent. Hazur, he was thinking, and he was brainstorming further and said, what if we remove the word shootings? Because when you say Charlie Hebdo, everyone knows it relates to the shootings, and we have to capture people's attention in a few seconds. So how about we say reaction to Charlie Hebdo? And he said to me, what do you think? I said, Hazur, this is fantastic. Hazur thought about it some more and said, he took out a yellow post-it note, and he took out his pen and he wrote on it, reaction to Charlie Hebdo, ... He said, I think this will be a good cover, and this is a template for how you should do covers in the future. And he gave me the post-it note. He said, here is your cover. So I'll go to the next slide. So this is the cover that you would have seen in your homes, if any of you remember. And if you don't, you can probably see it online. So this is the cover which you received in your home, which was reaction to Charlie Hebdo, ... But you wouldn't have known that it was Hazur who gave deep guidance about how to get there. So this was the cover before, and by the time Hazur had given us his masterclass, this was the cover which we came with. And it was incredible to see Hazur in action, and his brainstorming and his attention to detail. So to take this on further, recently Hazur sent me to a conference of editors and CEOs of different magazines around the world, and I met the creative director for Time magazine, Time being, of course, one of the biggest magazines in the world. And I met the person who's responsible for all the design for the front covers. He was telling me about how he had gone to see Donald Trump 3-4 times in the last year. You might have seen front covers with Donald Trump on it. So I had coffee with him for 20 minutes, and I had taken out 8, 9, 10 different Review of Religions covers and said, give me your frank assessment. So he said, this one's okay, this one's not too bad, this one you need to change. Then he came on to this cover, which I've just shown you on your screen, which Hazur himself had designed, and said, this is a template for you. He said, out of all these covers, this is the creative director of Time magazine, out of all these covers, the cover which stands out amongst all of them is only this one, this reaction to Charlie Hebdo. This has a purpose in it, this has a theme in it, and this has a good design in it. Now, of course, I don't need any certification from the creative director of design for what Khilafat al-Masih does, God forbid, but it just supports the fact that Khilafat al-Masih has incredible aesthetic and secular knowledge, which no doubt comes from Allah the Almighty. There are so many similar examples like this, where Hazur guides us in Review of Religions in so many ways, and which is why we are being successful today. So one thing I've noticed over the many years that I've had the honor of seeing Hazur is Hazur's utmost humility. I once in Fazl Mosque came into Hazur's office, and he had a small feather duster, and he was cleaning his desk. The way he was doing it was as if he has done it many times before. I cannot say for sure, but you know when someone does something in a routine, he was doing it like it is an absolute routine for him. Now, of course, imagine I walk into Hazur's office, and Hazur is there dusting everywhere on his desk. Me being a servant of Khilafat, I of course just immediately intrinsically said, Hazur, please allow me to help you clean your desk. And Hazur just smiled it away, and he was sitting down, and he said, look, I put my things in certain places and I don't like them to be moved around. So therefore, I sometimes think it better to clean it myself. It's amazing that Hazur literally just has to press one button and 100 people would come running and consider it an honor, yet Hazur did it himself. I remember once in Islamabad, I walked into Hazur's office and I sat down. And as soon as I sat down, Hazur got up and started walking to where the door entrance is. And I was a bit surprised. I stood up immediately. And again, Hazur did it like a routine. Hazur went and got the remote for the ventilation, which is near the door. And I was standing up near to Hazur's desk, and Hazur had the ventilation remote in his hand. And Hazur turned to me and said, do you prefer it to be hot or cold? I was, of course, utterly embarrassed. And I said, Hazur, I like it to be however you like it. And then Hazur smiled and he set the temperature and he walked back. But again, the way he did it was such like a normal thing. He only had to raise his eyebrow and I would have ran, and there would be, I'm sure, 100 people who have done the same. But Hazur chose to do it himself. Again, on many occasions, I've seen that Hazur sometimes has a bottle of water next to him, but sometimes he has some bottle of water which is at a distance. Yet on many occasions, I've seen Hazur get up, pour the water, and come back. And on many occasions, I've implored Hazur that please allow me to do it. And every time he says, just sit down. And he does it in a way that it's, again, just routine for him. He could have very easily asked, but again, it's Hazur's humility that despite being on this loftier status, that he does these tasks by himself, even now. One thing I could mention is also with regards to one thing that might be, which is interesting, is that I myself have always been very weak in Urdu, and I never knew how to read or write Urdu at all. And I never imagined that I would be in a place where I'd be translating the sermons of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih. Why I would like to mention this is that not out of any effort of mine or not out of any talent of mine, but out of the miracle of Khilafat, it's amazing how someone can achieve something. So when I dedicated my life, one of the first lessons Hazur gave me is that obedience can take you further than knowledge. Obedience can take you further than knowledge. And this is something I came to realize over time, that if you just put all your belief and trust into Khilafat, then everything comes into place. So when I first dedicated my life, Hazur was initially sending me to Africa, and he prepared me and told me how it would be very difficult. And I was ready for it. My father personally was born in Ghana. I have a link with Ghana, and I was at Waqf and I was ready to go there. And he told me to, after my studies, come and he would send me to Africa as a teacher. When I returned to Hazur, he said, now I'm sending you, now the needs of the Jamaat have changed. I'm going to send you to Rabwa for a year to learn Urdu, and then I'm going to come back and make you a translator. So, of course, then that changed, and I listened to Hazur. I went to Rabwa for a year, and over there I had to learn the basics of Urdu. And it was in Rabwa where the first time I established my connection with Hazur in a greater sense, because I would write to Hazur and Hazur would reply to me in detail. So I remember when I returned from Rabwa after a year, it was, I got a message from Hazur. I'd only learned up till year 5 or year 6 of Urdu. It was still the very basics. And I got a message from Hazur that be prepared to translate a jalsa. And I was, of course, very scared that, I've only learned the basics. How would I possibly do this? So I wrote a request to meet Hazur, and I had intended to meet Hazur in the evening, as normally I've always done all my life. On the day of the mulaqat at 12 at noon, I suddenly receive a phone call from the PS office saying, "Where are you?" Hazur saying, where are you? He's waiting for you. So I was confused, and I just quickly got ready, rushed to the Hazur's office, and I walked in, and Hazur said, "Where were you?" I said, "Hazur, I'm very sorry. I thought I had to come in the evening because this is what I normally do." And Hazur then laughed and said, "Evening times are for family and children, but you will come see me in the daytime." Over the course of this time, I was deeply honored that Hazur himself was able to teach me different aspects of Urdu and different words to help me with my translation. I was amazed to see the process which Hazur undergoes. Many times I would go to Hazur to ask him for a word, and even though Hazur knew the word, he had used it himself. It was always Hazur's way that he would take out 2 or 3 dictionaries and really look through them, and sometimes ask me to look on my laptop on the internet, and sometimes he would look himself, and he would look through the different options and say, "Okay, use this word." He would even teach me that this is how you should elevate your tone and lower your tone of voice, and in this way he would keep on teaching me different ways of the words of Urdu and the words of translation over a course of many years. Sometimes he would take out the 5-volume commentary and give me tips from there about translation. Sometimes he would take out some other book. I remember an interesting anecdote on one occasion that I often come in with my laptop, and Hazur does have an electronic kind of dictionary, but he was using the traditional dictionary. And Hazur said to me, "Let's have a race. You look for this word on your laptop, and I'll look for it on the traditional way." And I, of course, started looking, and by the time I had not even finished, Hazur already found it. And Hazur joked that sometimes, he said in these kind of loose words, that old is gold. And but I do have to say as well that Hazur is deeply in tune with technology, and often he has an electronic kind of dictionary, which many times when I've asked him for words, he would look up and he would tell me that this is the meaning that you should use. So why I'm saying about obedience, that I never thought for a moment whether Hazur was sending me to Africa or whether Hazur was saying to do translation. I never thought what was right or wrong for me. I just put my trust into Khilafat. And I remember once after 5 years when Hazur started putting me into translations, although he had mentioned it before, it wasn't clear for me exactly what I would be doing. But once after 5 years, when Hazur felt that he had trained me to a certain level, he said, "By the way, everything that I've been doing for these last 5 years was to train you for this." And so I remember on one occasion outside a mosque, someone came to me and said, "Oh, mashallah, you are involved in the translations of Hazur's sermons." It so happened that a childhood friend was standing next to me. And I'm so glad that he was, because he said something that was in my heart. And he said, "Look, don't say anything of acknowledgement to him, to Amer Safir. I know him from childhood. He didn't know a word of Urdu. These are all the miracles and blessings of Khilafat alone. And that's it." And that is the ultimate truth. If I have done anything right, it's only to put my obedience in Khilafat and to trust him completely. Interestingly, Hazur would, in the very early days, when Hazur would sometimes give me some tasks, like to go some words of grammar or some sentences, to go and research it and come back. Now, in those early days, foolishly, I thought that perhaps Hazur was asking me so I can come and give that information to Hazur. And I would go do the research, say, "Hazur, here is this grammar, and here's the construction of it, which it should be." Or then Hazur would give me something else, and I would come back and say it again. Then one day, Hazur said to me, "By the way, I'm not saying this to learn myself. I know all of this. I'm saying this for your training." And so that's when I realized, and many times Hazur has corrected my English, and Hazur's English is of excellent level. So this is what I realized in the early days, that all the tasks Hazur give me is for my own knowledge, not, God forbid, that I'm going to be informing Hazur of anything. There was a joke which Abid Khan Sahib also mentioned in his diary. When I was in Rabwa and I did not know Urdu that well, I was not familiar with the culture. And at the time, I started this correspondence with Hazur. For the first time in my life, I had this relationship where Hazur would reply to me in detail, lengthy letters, and would encourage me about my learning of Urdu. So I decided that I wanted to make Hazur smile. There was something funny that happened with me, and I thought, let me write this letter to Hazur and see if he smiles. So I wrote to Hazur that what happened is that somebody had come to my door who was the assistant of the Wakil Ala in Rabwa. And for those familiar with Urdu, he said that the Mia Saab or whatever his name was, yaad kar rahe hain. So those of you who know, yaad kar rahe hain means that you should come and see him. It was my early days of learning Urdu, and I did not understand what that meant, and I took it literally. And I thought yaad kar rahe hain means that he is remembering you. So I closed the door. I said, Jazakallah, thank you. And I felt really happy that this very senior person in the Jamaat was remembering me. And I that's all. I went back and I sat down and I said, wow, this person is remembering me. It's really amazing. So the next day, the same person comes, this assistant of this, Wakil Ala or Mian Sahab, and he said again that, he is aapko yaad kar rahe hain. So again, I said to him, thank you. And I closed the door and I said, I got happy again. And I said, wow, this person is remembering me for 2 days in a row. And, I was getting very happy. The third day, the same person came and said, wo aapko yaad kar rahe hain. I got a bit worried that why is this person remembering me for 3 days in a row and sending somebody? There must be something not right. So I asked my friend in Rabwa, and he said, you're silly. This doesn't mean that he's remembering you. This means you have to go see him. So I rushed and then went to see him. But I wrote this to Hazur, and I was amazed that at the time it was Khilafat centenary and many people had traveled to London. One by one, so many different people came to me, said, Hazur, we had never seen Hazur laugh this much. Some of Hazur's relatives mentioned it to me. The Wakil Ala himself mentioned it to me. Other people who had gone for family mulaqats mentioned to me that Hazur related this incident to us, and he was laughing like we've never seen him laugh before in happiness. And that was my only aim. I was ready to accept being the fool for the sake of making my Khalifa happy. And I was so happy that Hazur said this. And recently, I was amazed that after a period of 8 years, Hazur mentioned it. And some of you may have read it in my good friend Abid Khan Saab's diary. So that was very interesting that that happened. So one thing that's interesting is that being in Review of Religions, I have many missionaries and waqfs who work with me. And I'd heard from many other people about how long a waqf should work in a day. But I decided that I should ask Hazur myself because I'm managing many staff. So I went to Hazur, and Hazur at the time, many times when I see Hazur, he's doing his letters, which he's doing, signing his letters to many people. And I said, Hazur, I have a question to ask you because so many people I've heard say this, but I want to ask you directly. And I said, Hazur, how many hours should I make the waqf in my office or myself or the people in my office work? Hazur was looking down and he was signing letters. His eyes suddenly shot up and he said, 18 ghante. He saw my startled reaction and he said, Kya? What? And he said, look, 80, it doesn't mean that there's a specific time that you have to work in the day as a waqf zindagi, as a life devotee. What it means is that you give as much time as possible in the office and then you go home and you work as much as you can. So that was the guidance. But what's amazing is the rounded guidance Hazur gives. On one occasion, I went to Hazur and I said, Hazur, I get exhausted and I fall in bed by 10 o'clock and I can't do anything more than that. And I don't understand why I feel that way. Hazur, the first thing Hazur said to me is that, do you have breakfast? And at that time I said, no, Hazur, I don't have breakfast. He said, okay, I want you to have a good breakfast, a strong breakfast, have eggs, and I want you to drink milk throughout the day. Hazur then said, how many hours do you sleep in the day? Do you get 68 hours? And it was possible that I was not getting that much. He said, okay, make sure you have that much. So Alhamdulillah, since I've been doing that, my body is a lot stronger and I can work a lot more. Once again, I'm showing you the rounded guidance that Hazur gives. On another occasion, I went with my wife and my children were very small. And he said, Amer, I want you to overnight stay awake and take care of at least one child when they wake up at night. He also said to me on one occasion that make sure you take your wife during the month at least once or twice for an outing. So it's amazing how Hazur gives this rounded guidance. And I remember once in the early days of translation, I got very ill. My immune system used to be really weak. And once in the translation, I got really ill. And I decided not to tell Hazur because I felt I don't want to waste Hazur's time. I was ill for a few weeks due to some bug. And somebody told Hazur. And when I went to see Hazur after recovering, Hazur was not happy. And when I say Hazur is not happy, Hazur's displeasure is different to normal people. It always has a meaning and a purpose and underlying love behind it. He said, look, first of all, by you not being fine actually affected the Jamaat. The Jamaat got negatively affected. And this is why from now on, when you get ill, you first of all immediately write to me for prayers, and then you take some homeopathic medicine from here. At the time, he told me to take Econite 1000, and he said take it immediately when it happens. And he also told me to take something called Echinacea Force, which is herbal kind of remedy. He said keep on taking it, and even take it afterwards for some time after you recover. And amazingly, my immune system being extremely weak, since then, alhamdulillah, through the blessings of Khilafat and his guidance, my immune system is very strong, and I barely get ill now. And I believe more than the medication that Hazur did, it's the prayers of Khilafat. But that's just really amazing for me, because as I said, I used to get very ill, and now I didn't. Another thing that happened once is that during those days, I was a bit lazy applying for my daughter's nursery. And I was so engrossed in my work, I thought, I'll leave it. Nursery is not that important, and I'll do it later. So then I went to Hazur and I mentioned to him once casually that, Hazur, I've been a bit lazy, and I didn't apply for my daughter's nursery. And now the only school available is one of the worst schools in the area, which was actually getting turned into academy. But I thought, oh, well, it's a nursery. Hazur took it really seriously. And he said to me immediately, this is very wrong. You shouldn't do this. This age that your daughter's at, it was about nursery age 3-4, is one of the most important ages in her whole life. This is the age where they develop things, where they develop their understanding. They develop based on influence. And so therefore, do not go take her in that school, apply for a good school. Now, out of obedience, I did not ask Hazur how this would be possible, because the time for the application was already finished. But I said, Hazur said this, I will apply. So I was amazed that even though the two good schools in the area were far away from our house, and as people know who apply for primary schools, all based on distance, we were not even near the distance to that school at the time. But somehow, miraculously, within 2 weeks, within a week or two of applying, I got offers for my daughter in the two best schools of the area. And again, this was the blessings of Khilafat, that although I had been lazy and I had not applied, Hazur gave me guidance about the importance of this young age and taking her to the best environment. And through the blessings of Hazur, I was able to get her in that school where she still is at the moment. Just one or two last things I would like to say. I think one thing's interesting is that yesterday, I know my very good friend Abid Khan Saab gave a lecture on his diaries. I'm a big fan of his diaries as well. So one thing I would like to share about his diaries is that on many, many occasions, I've gone to see Hazur, 5 or 6 occasions, and Hazur spoken to me in detail about Abid Khan's diaries. Sometimes I've been to Hazur and I've seen Abid Khan's diary on Hazur's desk ready for Hazur to check. So Hazur explained to me once that, look, I take 20 minutes to go through Abid Khan's diary, I make corrections, and I do all of this. So Hazur, at the time, I used to not read his diaries immediately. I would say, okay, I'll leave it aside. I've got things to do. I'll read it in a few days or a week. Hazur said to me, I do it in 20 minutes. How come you take so long? So then I said, okay, I have to speed up my game and read his diary quicker. So the next time Abid said his diary, I immediately stopped my car wherever I was. I read it, and I was really proud that I managed to read it in half an hour. So I went back to Hazur, and Hazur asked me himself again that, did you read Abid's last diary? I said, yes, Hazur, alhamdulillah, I read it in half an hour. But Hazur smiled and said, half an hour? You're the editor of the Review of Religions. I take 20 minutes and you take half an hour? So I said, okay, I have to speed it up even further. But alhamdulillah, as a result of Hazur on a number of occasions mentioning this to me, as soon as I received the diary of Abid Khan, I'm probably one of the first people in the world to read his diaries. I stop my car wherever I am, I read his diary. People sometimes send me the link and I reply to them that I've read his diary. So me and Abid are very close friends, and I think this is something which I thought I would share because he gave his lecture yesterday, and Hazur on a number of occasions has inculcated me to read the diary, and I hope that I'm one of the first people to read it now, and hopefully in 20 minutes, and pray that I can. Finally, just one or two small things I can mention. People know about Hazur's amazing memory. Many times, Hazur, as everybody knows, Hazur has so many departments he's dealing with, and the way he remembers them is incredible. Once I was in Mulaqat with Hazur, and Hazur was asking me about a matter from 2-3 years ago, and I forgot, I could not remember it offhand. And somehow Hazur remembered it in detail. And Hazur started going in detail, and at the end of it, he looked at me and said, "Badam kaya karo," like eat almonds. So of course I took it seriously as well. I started eating almonds for a little while, and I took it as a joke as well. The next day I came to the PS office to look at my mail. There's a box which has mail from Hazur, and I opened it and it had a packet of almonds with my name on it from Hazur. And I was amazed that Hazur had specially sent me some almonds. Of course, it was a blessing, but also an indication to me that I should sharpen my memory, which I hope I've tried to do. So finally, I'd like to mention that one thing that I remember that in an interview with Khudam al-Ahmadiyya in 2008, Hazur was asked that, how do you work so hard? I've seen myself many occasions, Hazur working extremely hard. Most of the time when I go in, Hazur is signing his hundreds and hundreds of letters which he's sending back to people and signing them. So I remember in an interview in 2008, Hazur explained that before Khilafat, when I was Nazri Allah, I didn't like sitting in the office too long. After my office, I would go to my farm and do heavy labor, or I would do surprise inspections or go to different offices. But somehow after Khilafat, there was a kind of a button that was pressed, and I was able to sit from morning to night and do everything. And some kind of, he implied transformation happened. Recently, I've been blessed that I was able to ask Hazur a number of contemporary questions, which we published as interviews in Review of Religions. One was on the topic of cannabis, one was on the topic of true love, and one was on the topic of mental health, amongst a few others. Apart from the amazing answers, which you can read on the review site, I was amazed that when I asked Hazur these questions, the way that it was almost I could witness this click in Hazur. The way he would, for 20 minutes or so, or even longer, just come out with all this knowledge, religious knowledge, quotes from Hadith, quotes from the Quran, quotes from contemporary knowledge, quotes from modern research, and combine that together in a logical, rational, and incredible answer. Although, of course, at the time I'd be writing down Hazur's answer, it was amazing and incredible to see Hazur, how Allah the Almighty guides him almost live. And this was the most amazing thing for me, how Hazur is able to do all of these things. And that's something which I definitely cherish. And I find that Hazur definitely, the way he provides these answers is testament to the fact that Hazur is guided by Allah the Almighty. So one thing I can end by saying is that, in conclusion, one thing I've seen is that if anyone is following the Sunnah, the practice of the Holy Prophet ﷺ today, most of all, it's Hazur. I've been able to see this on so many occasions in different ways, how Hazur is an embodiment as much as possible of the character that the Holy Prophet expects of people. He presents that example to us, and I find that is the thing which is the most amazing for me and the most inspiring for me, is that great example that Hazur has set for us.
Jazakallah, Amer Safir Sahib. What can I say after such an in-depth and interesting lecture you've given? I'm not going to waste any time and jump over to the questions, as we have quite a few lined up. And I'll kick it off with Rabia Shah Saiba, who asks, Assalamu alaikum, how long did the Al-Qalam project take? How many people took part? And from how many countries? Will there be another similar project for those unable to take part in the first one?
So what happened is, initially, everyone knows Rizwan Beg Saab. He started this project, and he had this idea of setting up Al-Qalam. And what happened initially is that he had been trying for many years, and he came to me and said, is there a way that we can bring this into Jamaat? And I said, look, let's go to Hazur. Let's let Hazur decide. So amazingly, when we went to Hazur and this was presented, Hazur said, I'll provide 30,000 people, referring to Jalsa, and said, let's do it at Jalsa. And Hazur then officially launched it himself, and Hazur, alhamdulillah, took part in it himself and penned Surah Al-Fatiha, which was, of course, amazing as well. One thing Hazur said to me on one occasion is that so many people have written to me that they don't get the chance to do Al-Qalam because in Jalsa's limited capacity. Hazur said that we should start in Beit al-Futuh, especially for ladies, because they write to me a lot, a permanent section of Al-Qalam where people at certain assigned timings can come and take part in the Al-Qalam project. That currently is happening right now with conjunction with respected Amir Saab and Sadr Lajna, and we hope that soon we will be starting a permanent section there, assigned times. It could be once a month or twice a month. It's not confirmed yet. And this is Hazur's wish, that will then continue in this way permanently.
Amer Sahib, there's two similar questions, one from Dure and the other from Salim Ahmed, who ask, how do you decide which articles go into the review of religions and which do not? And also, in addition to that, can anyone send material for the review?
I think the thing is that, especially in the early days of Review of Religion, so I was only 27 when I became editor. I'm not saying that as any feat. I'm saying that as the opposite, because all the people who came before me were far more knowledgeable than me. And I feel that Hazur, knowing this, the only way Hazur how I could know what articles to put is that Hazur had to come down to our level. We were a very young team, and hold our hand and guide us in every single step about what to do and how to do it in Review of Religion. So all these aspects of what to put in review is being guided by Hazur. One of the things Hazur told me early is that the Promised Messiah came with two types of tabligh. One was for the scholar. So Hazur said to me that many books of the Promised Messiah, even you will struggle to understand because they were aimed at academics and scholar. And the reason why Hazur said that the Promised Messiah did that is because one scholar can influence thousands of people. Hazur said at the same time, there are some books of the Promised Messiah like Haqiqatul Wahi, which are for everyone. And therefore, Hazur was explaining to me that he said that somebody had come to me and said, basically Hazur said that Review of Religion should have both of these type of articles. You should have academic research type of articles, and you should have shorter articles. And Hazur even showed me different magazines which he had, like Reader's Digest and others, and said that look at the way that they have short articles with interesting titles and take influence from that. In addition, there are certain topics which Hazur has instructed us. For example, Hazur has said that the Promised Messiah has said that there is no contradiction in science and religion, therefore feature science regularly. Hazur, of course, had said things like Muharram, Hajj and Ramadan, you must have all the time, every year. In addition, Hazur said to look for comparative religious topics amongst different things. I'll give you one example, interesting one about Hazur guides us. Once there was a discussion with Hazur about doing a topic of the honeybee or honey. And Hazur then said to me that there is a person in Mauritius who has written 2 books on this topic. Go ask him to write an article. So I asked him to write the article. When I brought it back to the team, there were some people who had reservations in the review team about certain things he said, which have not been proven yet. So Hazur then said, okay, I know a person in Canada who's done a PhD in this topic. I don't know the term for it in honeybees. Go to him now and ask him to recheck it or rewrite it. During those days then, Hazur gifted me with a copy of Time magazine, which the front cover was on colony collapse disorder. And it had a post-it note with my name that from the private secretary that Hazur has given this for you to read. So in this way, this was the first time Hazur established a peer-reviewed process where we would check it so thoroughly with different people. He himself guided to the even external sources like Time magazine, which he gave me to consult from. He himself connected me with Ahmadis who had no idea of different countries, to the extent that Hazur asked me if I had the email address of that person. And when I didn't, Hazur even sent me the email address of that person. So there are many different cases like this. Time does not permit. But so much of the stuff, I just gave you one example of the covers. So much of the stuff is inspired by Hazur's guidance.
Jazakallah, Amer Sahib. I wish we could carry on, but unfortunately time has caught us up. I would like to thank you from the Talim department, from the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association UK, Jazakallah, for coming and sharing some valuable experience with us and the viewers. And I'm sure the viewers would also. Before I do end, I would just like to remind our viewers straight after this, you can go to the PAMA virtual iftar, which started 4 minutes ago, and that's available on YouTube, and you can find out all the addresses from the websites. And also, I would like to remind viewers that tomorrow Imam Safir, Imam of the London Mosque, will be presenting the last Ramadan special lecture, and that's entitled "What Can Ahmadi Muslims Do for the Cause of the Jamaat?" It just leaves me to end by saying once again to Amer Safir Saab, Jazakallah, Allah be with you, and please remember all of us in your prayers as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.